Welcome to episode 38 of the Critical Fools podcast. This week we'll be discussing the 2005 film The Squid and the Whale, directed by Noah Baumbach. This film takes place in Brooklyn, New York, Park Slope specifically.
Repping your area, dude.
And that's
Pretty
not
close.
it's not my area.
Pretty close.
Not my area.
It will be.
No, not. Anyway. But anyways, this film, I picked it for this week because I found it by accident. Actually, I was just watching Netflix, and I think the title got me. I was like, "Oh, what's this? It's a weird title." And as I watched it, I thought the themes about, parenthood, the identity of not just, like especially with like kids, right? How they're warped a little bit with their parents, but also how parents, like adults, are, unfortunately, right? Like how like they have to balance being a parent, but also their own identity. Like there's like, I mean, one day you'll be a parent, right? And there'll be this like kind of like juxtaposition of like I have my own identity, but also it's not just about me, like that fine balance, right? Because you also can't be spoiling your kids like crazy, right? That's just going to lead to bad habits too. So I'm curious, like what you thought off the bat. Like obviously this movie I think could yield a lot of different emotions and thoughts, because this is not like there's some strong scenes and strong sequences and topics. I'm curious, like what was your high level gut punch takeaways after you finished watching this film?
I guess my first takeaway from this film is they're being honest, right? Because I think oftentimes, at least in films from like the 50s, 60s, 70s, a lot of times the typical nuclear family unit is over idealized. It's shown to not necessarily have the problems, but they took a really good look at a family that has a lot of dysfunction, and specifically both of the parents are writers, and within that dynamic there's sort of a lot of tension. They often put their ego sort of clashed with one another, and which led to a lot of problems within their marriage. And the other big takeaway is that I found that I didn't have a character that I necessarily liked in this movie.
I think that's natural, right? I think this movie is supposed to kind of portray it. I mean, we just off camera we discussed another movie where I think it's on purpose that no character is supposed to be likable, and it's supposed to reflect more like how people are like imperfect to a degree, right? No matter who you are, if you're rich or poor, or you're a celebrity or not. Yeah, I think what I found interesting also was, like you said, how maybe sometimes it's not covered in film. I know novels is probably like, there's like a lot of novels about this stuff, but how like, a relationship is working for, like, even if it's dysfunctional, it's kind of working because you're kind of like in the same kind of like, let's just say level. Mm-hmm. But then if somebody like say moves down or moves up, in this case, the whole balance is out of whack, right?
Yeah, because in a sense, it was in this film. It was one partner's career trajectory over another's.
Yeah, so like it was right now they were the same level, right? Like one had written like articles here and there in the New Yorker magazine. So I'll reference the character's name, Joan, I believe. And Bernard was a teacher that was trying to, create his master work. But obviously his wife at the the beginning of the movie, before they decided to separate, right? She gets a great book deal. And her book is actually, like we learned through the movie, that her book is actually received very well. Sure. And this just grinds Bernard's gears a bit, because he sees himself as the savant, the super, the artist, right? This guy that's just misunderstood by society. Yes, and what you see is that like all the cracks that they were having in their relationship prior to this moment where we see them in the movie, they starts resurfacing, and this impacts the children to both kids. Yeah, Walt is the teenager, and I think Frank is the one in middle school or something like that. And in their own ways, they kind of act out. And I think for the purposes of this film, each kid also gravitates towards one parent or the other.
Yeah,
obviously there's a lot. Yeah, go ahead.
I would say neither of them healthily cope with their family dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, Walt is told to go to a therapist, right? Which we'll talk about as we talk about the movie. But
before that, though, and his dad doesn't give the best advice.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to dig in. But what I wanted to ask, just to kick it off, is like, what did you think of the setting, and because I feel like even though it was based partly on the director's kind of like childhood, I think the setting also plays a role into kind of how the characters behave and act. And also, what did you think of?
By the setting, are you
Oh,
talking about physical location like Brooklyn?
yeah, Park Slope. I mean, Park Slope. I mean, I guess for me to give a little bit of a backdrop, Park Slope is considered a very affluent artistic borough in Brooklyn. Like it's the people that you meet in this movie are the type of people. I mean, obviously they're not the best people, but like the archetype is kind of like what you would run into in this kind of borough, right? Like kind of like this educated, a little bit affluent, maybe not like ultra like Bezos wealth, but like, you know, they're not, let's just say they're not living in like, you know, South Bronx, you know,
Right.
or Harlem, right? So that's my first question. My second one was, I imagine, I don't know if the director's parents were writers, but I also found the maybe the professions to be intriguing because of also the setting and like I think like I said all connects. What did you think of also like the fact that they were writers like specifically for this movie and like I'm just curious like what did you think of the director's choices of the certain backdrop and character like background and profession and et cetera et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, it was just this film, or like the characters were speaking to a specific demographic. Generally, you're sort of like middle class, upper middle class in Brooklyn, right? White family. And within that, there was like the characters are very pretentious. And so you have a different dynamic as opposed to, families who are sort of on a lower income scale within like the Bronx or like parts of like Harlem or like other parts of Queens or Brooklyn. So it was interesting, right? Because they were focusing more on the like, I would say more on like the liberal middle class like family dynamic, which has a completely different sort of culture in the way that they raise kids, as opposed to probably other family structures you'd see in, um, with other families that are not within that sort of sheltered demographic. I don't know because it spoke to like right the dad was an academic, so already you're sort of like kind of you sense from him a lot of like liberal pretentiousness, and even in the way he sort of speaks about other people, like the tennis player, he looks down on them like a lot. The quote unquote tennis pro, I forgot the guy's name, but he calls him
Yvonne, yeah.
yeah, he calls him a philistine, right? I mean, the type of language he uses is just it was incredibly pretentious and condescending. And so he sort of channels that energy to his kids, and so they end up adopting, or at least with his teenage son, he ends up adopting that sort of attitude as well, kind of condescending and looking down on others. Um, and that creates a lot of problems when he tries to cope, and in how he sort of how the son deals within the relationships within like his classmates and his girlfriend.
So, what did you think of Yvonne and that whole? Because it happens early, the Yvonne Joanne Joan relationship. What did you think of like that dynamic and how that happened so suddenly?
It wasn't sudden though.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, you could kind of hint, but I mean,
I
like,
mean, the man, the way the parents went about dealing or trying to unload their garbage on their kids was I just found incredibly unhealthy. And if people actually did that in real life, I would say they should reevaluate hmm, how they deal with their children when they're going through that sort of separation process,
yeah, I mean,
right?
this is
Because the dad just so like I mean you hear that often, right? Where oftentimes one parent will badmouth the other parent and everything they do to the children, right? And then that just creates this unhealthy like dynamic where it's like you shouldn't like I didn't grow up from that environment, but and it's hard for me, I guess, like to judge, but I don't think that that's the best way of going about things. If I went through that process, or I would try not to badmouth my partner, right, to like our potential kids, because I just don't think that's healthy. And like that, at the end of the day, that would still be the mother of my children, right? So like you should have that level of respect for them to not influence their kids in that kind of way. And so, like you, in this case, you had the dad just bad mouthing the mom, talking about how she was unfaithful, just painting her to be the absolute villain. And then you had the mom who was just being open, like to the kids about like how many partners she slept with, and just being and neither of them saw that as problematic, which like kind of blew my mind. But I think that's what they were trying to
Yeah.
illustrate, is that people who are of this sort of mindset of this profession don't see that as an issue. They think that they should just be open with their kids about everything. And in my view, there's some things that you should keep private as a parent and as kids that you definitely should keep private from your parents.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like this movie is also speaking to the fact that like when you go through like let's say a nasty kind of separation or divorce and your kids are like teenagers or let's say middle schoolers, it's a lot different when you're parents or you're like a toddler or you're a baby, right? Like, you're probably still affected because you're still like a child, but like, you're not really you're a tool in a different way. They were clearly like using their kids as like pawns in their
There's
proxy
like
war.
bargaining chips almost.
Yeah,
Yeah,
as their proxy war, right? Because even when we get to the ending, right, Bernard asks Walt like, "Oh, you want to stay with me, right?" And then we'll get to that scene later. But
mm-hmm.
it's even towards the end of the movie, the parents
You're
are
putting
trying,
an undue pressure on your kids, which you should not do.
but this is unfortunate, like you were saying, it is well. I mean, I haven't gone through like my parents got divorced, but I was like, 2, 3. Like it wasn't like
Mm-hmm.
I was not old enough to be used as a chess piece.
I've seen this dynamic happen with
Yeah,
friends and like
exactly.
family members that we know have been divorced, and like, what are you doing? I was like, yeah, I mean, like any garbage you had is between the parents. You shouldn't involve the kids in that because they already have this stress. And I like how they brought that up at the beginning where Walt is talking to one of his friends and he's like, how is it like his Walt is new to it. He's like, co-parenting doesn't seem that big a deal. And the kid's like, dude, it's terrible. He's like, you're just being shuttled around like cattle. He's like, parents are just talking smack about one another. It's not the best environment.
Yeah. I also find it interesting how like Bernard just gets another apartment like on the other side of the park. Like it's still they're
The other
still
side
the
of Park
same.
Slope.
Yeah, they're still I think other side of Prospect Park. So like they're still in the same borough, right? But yeah, I mean, so digging now that you mentioned the kids, right? Like, what did you think of how both Walt and Frank processed being basically pawns in this proxy battle?
I mean, I think that it's kind of natural when you have this kind of dynamic. As fortunately, one kid will kind of gravitate towards one parent over another. But part of it is like, did they do that out of their own choosing, or were they kind of guided in that way, right? Based on the parents talking smack about one another. It was interesting that they had one kid, and obviously because it's a movie, one kid gravitate towards the dad and the other gravitate towards the mom. Yeah, and they obviously didn't process it or like handle their situations very well. In the way the dad was sort of pushing his son to self sabotage, even though he didn't quite, the kid's right, he's in high school, so he doesn't quite see or understand that until like later on. Whereas with the son, he acts out in many different ways in the school that is not the healthiest. And I think both of them really need therapy.
Yeah, both of them. One does get the therapy because
I think the younger really needs it.
Yeah, he ends up getting caught with plagiarism. But yeah, you're right about the sabotage, right? So so for context for our viewers, Walt ends up dating, actually, in my opinion, like seems like, at least from our movie's perspective, a really like normal, decent,
nice girl.
Yeah, chick, and he starts self-sabotaging because he's trying to emulate his dad, right? Who was like at this time.
Which kind of speaks to the larger things. It's kind of like a cycle where like you see like how your parents acted, and it's like that example that was set for you, and so a lot of times a lot of people will make that same mistake.
Yeah, so like Walt's dad, like it's really weird, like honestly messed up, right? Because like Walt's Bernard ends up getting involved with a student who Walt actually had a crush on.
That was a man.
And also that one of the big moments in this film is that speech that Bernard gives Walt, saying like, I married too young.
Play the field.
Yeah, I married too young. Don't make the mistake I did. Sow your oats, play the field.
And I'm like, dude, this kid's in like early high school with his first girlfriend. You shouldn't be telling him that at that point. It was just, the advice was just crazy. I was like, the kid is not at that maturity level to be able to emotionally compartmentalize like different aspects of relationships at that point. It's like 15 or 16.
Yeah, I think he's 16.
I'm like, what are you doing as a dad?
Well, I think we get that early, right? They're not
in college.
Yeah, I mean, I think we get this from both parents, that they're not really like, their main focus was their
craft.
Themselves. Yeah, right. Their craft. Yeah, not their children.
even the mom saying that, oh yeah, like I had an affair, like you guys actually met him when your dad was away. I'm like, what?
That was wild. I was like,
I
whoa.
was like, you introduced someone you were cheating on the. You introduced someone you were having an affair with to your kids while your husband was out of town. What is wrong with you? Like, I mean, there were so many instances where they were just trying to show how horrible these parents are, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, at every twist and turn, I was like, oh, it couldn't get worse here. No, they did something stupid. Oh no, like please tell me this is the end. Nope, there's another thing. I'm like, are you serious?
Yeah, it was yeah, I mean, so we're covering a lot of the plots, so we can probably into some deeper topics, but yeah, I was one thing I think the reason I like this movie is because like I think sometimes again it goes back to my introduction, like when you're like I'm not a parent, but like if you're a parent, I guess it's like a lot of juggling in your head, right? Like who you were before, who you are now, and who you want to be, and like you can see that both parents like you wonder if like the kids just happen because like there's a lot of societal pressure just to have kids once you're married.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if it just happened because like they decided, oh, maybe it's a good idea to have kids because the way they acted and talked about each other, about themselves, it seemed like they would be happier if they were both like world-renowned artists or writers than they were. Oh, you're a good dad. Like I just never felt in the movie that Joan or Bernard felt like, oh, like
Parenting was a top
yeah,
priority.
if somebody comes up to be like, "Oh, you're such a great dad," that would give them pride. I feel like they would just be like, "Whatever, like I don't care. Like is my book good?" That's what I feel like they would say. Like, did you like my book? Like they just didn't like it didn't compute in their brains. I think that was also intentional by the director. I think parents. I think the movie is really in many ways is about how parents don't recognize the huge impact they have on their kids until maybe it's too late.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean I agree.
So another thing I thought was interesting. So what did you think? So obviously Walt starts seeing the therapist, like, and I think what's interesting about the when he
That was towards the end, right?
yeah, it was like the last third because what you start seeing is that he's able to help Walt break down that like how his memory of his childhood is not
It's not what he thought. Like
it's not what he thought.
A
Yeah,
little deeper.
yeah, and we'll get to the ending, but I think also. I think this is a topic I want to touch upon because like I've also thought about like how I remember things as a kid, and
Mm-hmm.
I also even though like I've been writing like a unofficial autobiography, it's crossed my mind many times like, am I remembering things the way I want to remember them, or is there the wings they were like that
Oh
is like
man, and now we're
that
getting into more of like the subject matter from like New York Syndicoche, man.
yeah so it's like it's
Where it's like all the, like a lot of details were left out because it was through the main character's perspective.
yeah and so I mean I don't we talked a lot about that
Talking
movie.
about like is your experience like are you remembering things through your subjective lens or just the objective way in which things happened?
And there's something to that because obviously in this movie it explores it obviously towards the end, right? But it explores that Walt was remembering things not like
I don't even.
correctly.
I don't think he was just. I don't. I think he just didn't think about them.
Yeah,
It wasn't that until it was a realization. Oh shoot! Like yeah, my dad wasn't around at that point. I don't know if he was just or it wasn't remembering things in a certain way. It's just that he didn't think about them. And it took like the author to like look back and like, yeah, like when you were a kid, right? Who's the one who took you here? And like mom, like oh shoot, I'm just now realizing that.
yeah, but I think that speaks to like again, it goes back to like you tend to remember or think of things. You think of your story as a certain way, right? And so he was the therapist did his job, right? Got him to see it from a different angle and was like, oh yeah, like I idealized my dad, but he was never around. He didn't do anything with me. Like
By the way, I love the shots that they took. They were like criticizing the like school counselor, like therapist for only having a master's.
yeah,
I was just like, these guys are so pretentious.
yeah, I think again, like I think the director is actually somebody who I'm pretty sure like I think he comes from probably like a
Like academic elite.
yes. Like
'Cause I'm sure he's heard some of this language spoken about before. Like
yes,
like how they make jokes like that in The Big Bang Theory.
yeah,
right?
because this movie unlike his first one, Kicking and Screaming, this movie, he grew up in Park Slope, and I believe both of his parents were writers. I think they were both film critics, actually.
Hmm.
And they wrote for, I think, different papers. But yes, I imagine. I mean, I've read like some interviews where, um, where he says a lot of his inspiration for the script of this movie comes from his own personal life. Like, I think like exactly what you cited, which is I'm happy you brought it up. I think that's something that he's definitely heard growing up. The director,
I'm
like
sure.
like yeah, like who are you to critique and judge when you're just like you're this lowly, you're lucky to have this job. Another thing too, what's interesting is that a film that did influence him, like growing up, and you see this a lot with his style. Because I saw Kicking and Screaming. I don't know if I'll pick it for this pod, but even this movie, I see a little bit of it in it too. Diner is a film that he says like he's heavily influenced by because
I can see it.
I think he likes that kind of like
You can see it in terms of the way cuts were made and things like
yeah.
that.
So a little throwback to another pick of mine. I like you know me, like I always string them together, like yeah, string those plays together. But the yeah, so I that's a good point you made about like like those lines, because there's a lot of lines like that, right, where they're kind of snobby, the parents,
There's
and
it's just pretentious, like yeah, I'd put it as like the academic elite kind of talk, where they just kind of condescend and look down on people who don't have the credentials.
yeah, or like who can have like the Bernard does this a lot, right? Who can't have my high level conversations, right? Like you said, you go back to your point about the Philistines, right? Like you can't have my
Yeah, he talks about how certain books are better than others. Like, what do they make you read that crap in high school? Those books are
yeah,
terrible.
but where Walt gets caught, right, is that like he doesn't know what he's talking about, right? Because he's not like his dad has been reading for a
It's just
long time,
influence,
right?
right? Yeah.
Yeah, he's just saying the lines to sound smart. But remember, I think he gets caught by, I don't know if it's the ex girlfriend or whatever, but
I think it is.
He gets caught, and she's like, "That's not what it's about," because he hadn't read the book,
Yeah.
And that's what I like too, is that the film was catching on that like Walt is like trying to emulate his dad, but like he can't be him anyways because he hasn't
Mhm.
read all this stuff. He's not old enough to have read. Like he could start, but like it's gonna take time, right? Like
Right.
Bernard is probably like pretentious like that because he's probably read all these books and feel like, oh, look at me, I'm
I'm
Mickey.
so great because I've read a
Yeah,
lot of books.
yeah. So
Yeah.
so yeah, it is intriguing in that regard. But yeah, so obviously this movie is pretty straightforward with the plot, which we kind of covered, and we touched on some things. I guess I guess for you, when you're watching this film, what was something that like I guess you got? What did this movie make you start thinking about in general? Like, did it trigger anything, or is just like, oh, this is just a slice of life film or whatever?
Honestly, it was interesting. It was just sort of a slice of life. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say to clarify, I meant like watching this. It's not just thoughts. Like when you watched it, what did it like trigger like certain things in your brain, or like what did you like? Basically, when I watched it, like I was just like, wow, that's like I wasn't expecting the movie to get me thinking about certain things and stuff.
I mean, I guess I. So I will say I didn't have like this visceral reaction because I didn't come from like a divorced family. It was more. It was just interesting, and I'm not that surprised. I guess what was interesting was that they were talking about the odd family dynamics of specifically like middle class, upper middle class, like academic, like liberal dynamics, right? And that's sort of like at least the setting that I think they were trying to portray, this demographic and family structure. And it's not every family dynamic, but I think a lot. I guess that the thing that it sort of triggered was, yeah, a lot of people don't realize the damage they're doing to their kids when they're going through a process of separating, right? Because it's very traumatic to sort of break up a family unit, right? And then the kids are sort of collateral damage within that. And then it's really unfair to kids. I guess I never really thought about it to like a great degree, the toll it takes on kids going back from one parent to another just constantly, and then having to, because you're essentially uprooted. So like your room as a kid is like important, right? Because that's your sort of privacy, and you're sort of uprooted into a different environment every couple of days. Like that's a lot for a kid. And I think that one thing that they were really trying to get across is like stability is pretty necessary for like kids and when they're growing up, and when you're going through a divorce, right? You're sort of messing up that sort of family structure to a big degree.
Oh
Yeah.
dang, your camera cut, dude.
Oh, can you see me? Hold on.
Nah, dude.
What the heck happened? Of course, it cuts at that moment,
That's
right?
crazy, dude. Man, dude, there's gonna be a lot of work for me on this one.
Sorry. It's coming back
Yeah,
right now.
yeah, it's coming back. Yeah. Oh man. Okay, I'm keeping this in, dude. This is funny.
Hold
I'm
on.
gonna,
So
I'm gonna
I think what ended up happening is it switched right from my main camera to like this other one. This is really annoying. Switch camera. There we go.
Oh,
See?
that was great. I gotta keep that in. I'm keeping that in. The
Yeah, you can. I mean, no one's probably ever gonna watch this anyway. Let's
oh,
be honest.
we've been doing good, dude. Those ratings are going up, dude. But anyways,
How many do we have? 8 subscribers now?
no, still six,
Something
but we
like
got
that.
we got some more
Okay.
likes. Anyways, but yeah, I think this movie's pretty like straightforward. It's not even a long movie. I think it's like it comes in at like what? How many minutes is it?
It's like a little under 2 hours, something like that.
80. It's 81 minutes. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
So
it's
it's
really short then.
yeah. It's not that. It's not that. Yeah. It's 81 minutes. It's not that long, right? So yeah, I think we covered everything. And like, I mean, there's probably stuff we missed, but I don't think I like I said, I usually pick these types. You know, it's more of like a slice of life, but in a certain lens perspective of probably the director, just like Diner was, right? So
Hmm.
I think we can jump into like final thoughts and ratings, but
Sure.
I'll let you go first since I picked it. So
It was interesting. This film was definitely a slice of life, and obviously, we didn't really talk about the ending scene, but obviously, the ending scene was a representation of like the squid and the whale. The For those of you that don't know, like giant squid and whale fights are like some of the most like epic sea battles that there are. You often see a lot of whales that have a lot of scars when they actually fight because they're trying to like eat each other. And so like you know it's a pretty big fight, and I think what they're trying to represent with that is just that the squid and the whale are supposed to represent the dynamic between the mom and the dad, right? The fighting between them, and so like that was sort of the metaphor they were going for at in this film. And so it was interesting because this was a slice of life. Really, what you see is that you know divorce takes a toll, especially on kids. And I think that's what they were trying to illustrate. Because and none of them, not the parents, not the kids, none of them really dealt with the issue very well. Right? They didn't cope like at all. I think at the end, who was able to cope the best was the teenage son, and then that was after he sort of did some internal like digging and like understanding himself a little bit better. But it took a while, and he was probably the only character you can really kind of like, or at least that I sort of liked in the end, just because he had a little bit more self awareness and he was able to grow a little bit more at the end. But I thought the parents were terrible people, to be honest. Uh, I thought they were horribly selfish and put their own wants and desires ahead of like their kids at every twist and turn. Um, and yeah, like there's not a lot of redeeming qualities for like a lot of the characters in this movie, and so that was interesting because they really showed a very dysfunctional family dynamic that was going on. But yeah, like it was interesting how you said earlier that the director was really influenced by Diner because I saw a lot of like similarities in terms of like how scenes were shot and a lot of cuts that were taken between the two films. So you can see how that really influenced him. Um, Other than that, though, it was kind of like it was a steady pace, but there was nothing that really stuck out with this film. I guess it was just an interesting dynamic about pretentious people. And so, like, because of that, there was nothing I could really criticize, but nothing that super stuck out with this film to me. Um, so because of that, I think that's why I couldn't really push it into like a upper level. But for me, like I'd give this film an 8. I was debating between 7.5 to 8, but there was nothing I could specifically criticize.
yeah. Also, I thought
The length was healthy.
yeah, the length was like appropriate. Actually, it's like very few times I can say that. Like, oh, it could have been 5 minutes longer, or 10 minutes shorter. Like
Yeah.
it was actually like I thought like, oh, it's like I remember it being kind of short. I was like, oh, it's like 80 minutes, 81 officially. But I was
Mhm.
like, that's like a decent like Just sit and watch, and you can probably just knock it out. Yeah, I forgot that we didn't really talk about the endings. I'll tie in the ending with my final thoughts.
Sure.
Yeah, because like whatever, like you said, what ends up happening is like the Walt ends up running to the exhibit, the New York and the Metropolitan.
But yeah, we didn't really talk about his
Yeah,
dynamic with his dad and how he realizes how manipulative he's really been.
yeah, we kind of hinted at it, but like with the therapy. But yeah, like his dad's been manipulating him, and like actually his dad has an episode, right? Like he needs to go to the hospital, and then he tells him like, "You want to live with me, right?" And
Yeah.
Walt, like you said, has the self awareness to reject him, and basically in his own way act out, runs to the museum to look at the exhibit, right? Because he deep down realizes that he doesn't really want to live with his dad.
Well, he realizes that both parents, I think, are at fault. That was
Yeah.
the first time he really realizes that.
Exactly, and that's where we're left in the movie, right? And we actually didn't even get to talk about the performances either. I thought that actually the performances were good.
Oh, the actors' performances?
The cast was great.
Very good.
Yeah,
'Cause I dislike them all. So as actors, they did a very good job.
yeah. So they just to make sure we give credit where credit is due. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, like the ending is like Bernard has the health episode he has in the hospital, and Walt, like you said, for the first time in the movie, rejects him, at least specifically. I mean, like you said, I think he has issues with both parents, but he's been on the mom's case for a while. And like I said, we gloss over a lot of little details and scenes, but I think you just have to watch the movie. Like it's not like we can't just talk about every scene. I thought, yeah, I think when I watched this movie, like these are the kind of movies that I watch, because there's been others that I've watched recently for our pod research, and I don't think they're like amazing movies, but I don't know why they're just like maybe my biases. Like I go like, wow, that was like a movie. And I'm not gonna give this movie like in the 9 range because I'm highly critical, but this movie for me, like I've been through co-parenting, so like I was just like, oh, okay, this
So it
is
might
over
strike
the
a little bit higher chord than
yeah,
than
exactly.
it would
Struck a little bit of a chord. I've also had like my parents were definitely not like the ones in the movie, but the movie kind of reminded me how like there's never a right time to be a parent, but there is a transition in the sense that like you have to balance between your own identity and the identity of your family unit. And I think often people just think like, because having a kid is easy, right? That's just a couple pumps. And
Yes.
but I think what happens after is bigger, and I think a lot of people, I don't think they realize what it entails, and
Sure.
how it
The
can,
commitment.
and yeah, and how it affects how you make life decisions. Because I go back to what I said earlier, I felt in this movie that both parents, if you told them like, "Oh, you're a great parent," they would rather hear that they're a great writer, right? And I think that is my main point about this movie, that they were caught up in their own worlds, and they probably they still probably value their singlehood versus being a parent, right?
Yep.
And I know they keep hinting to the kids like, oh, you'll get it when you're older, but I think what they're gonna get is a different perspective on what parenthood is, right? Not like they want to be, like you said, it's hard to get out of the cycle, but also they're left traumatized with like, what the heck. Like you said, that's why I think the therapy session was important in the movie. So yeah, I thought the movie was good, and I've seen actually 3 of his movies. I actually like this more than the movie. Maybe we'll feel different if I ever pick that one, but I like this one more than the movie he did on Netflix recently that got all the acclaim.
Oh, a
Um,
family, or what was it?
Marriage
Family Story.
Story.
Marriage Story.
Yeah, and but I like Marriage Story more than I like Kicking and Screaming. But I will say that for me, this one 8.5 out of 10. I like this movie. It's nice and short. It's condensed. The acting is great, and the topics are really relevant, especially to your point. Where maybe it's because also where I'm in my life that I'm meeting more and more people. Maybe because I'm getting older, that are not like, they're in between this phase of like they had fun in college or whatever, but they also want to be kind of serious, but they also don't want to compromise on certain things that they're gotten used to in their lives. And what I mean by that is like their careers, their hobbies, their who they are, right? Because when you're in a relationship, and that's step one, right? But when you definitely have kids, right, you definitely have it adds more, what they call it, more balls to juggle, right? And I think some people don't realize they have to compromise or let go of some old balls to accept, like, to deal with the new ball. That's just a terrible analogy, but you get what I'm saying. So I think I think that's also why it hit a chord to me that I'm not like old as the parents, but I'm meeting people that are like, this is their dilemma, right? They can either, you know, compromise on something to gain something, but you still lose something. Like it's a trade-off, basically. Like I always say as an engineer, it's a trade-off. So yeah, I thought it was a solid pick. I like the movie. I mean, I don't rewatch it a lot, but it's a good movie.
Right.
So, but I'll leave it at that. And yeah, I mean, this was it was an interesting episode, and hopefully, if you enjoyed it, you will like and subscribe. This channel is slowly growing. Our view count is
A
ticking
little
up,
bit,
so little by little, dude.
little by little. Who knows? At some point, it's gonna be a big day when we hit the 100 subscriber mark.
Now, let's get to 10.
Let's get to 10 first. We'll celebrate with that.
Exactly.
All right. Until then, we'll see you next time. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed our commentary.